All right. So happy Thursday. Hope that you all are well and you're making it through this week not being as scared as maybe you otherwise would have, given our discussions on Tuesday. But I do want to kind of turn our focus more specifically to films today, and more specifically as to how does and you'll see some of these questions mirror some of the conversations from love as it relates to fear, right? And so my questions, again, kind of engaging and thinking about the way, how do films, how do movies perhaps influence how we live our lives in relationship to fear, okay? Like in what way, of the things that I'm frightened of the things that I'm scared of, do those have rootedness and do those have root rather in something I've seen in film, and something I've seen on TV, and something that I've seen on the internet? Or, are they from my own creation, my own experience in the world, etc.? Because arguably, certain things that I'm fearful of have been directly influenced by what I've witnessed on screen or what I've witnessed on TV, right? And a classic example here, okay? And really think about this for a second. But a classic example here. At night, it's dark. Let's say it's fall, so it's a little damp, a little chilly, a little windy. And you're outside, you're by yourself. You find yourself walking alone in a dark alley. Okay? Are you scared? Why? Or why not? Okay? Are you scared about walking in a dark alley by yourself? Why or why not? And arguably, if you are, which I would say most of us in some capacity or another, probably have a little bit of anxiety. We're probably a little bit on guard, right? And more so, I would say that probably those that are female identifying are feeling more frightened just for the fact that attacks and the threat of sexual assault is higher than it is for male identifying folks in these kind of scenarios, right? But even referencing that and even thinking about that, I mean, how many Law and Order SVUs start with that similar scenario, right? Or how many of these crime shows on TV where we're trying to catch somebody for committing a terrible act, right? Have some sort of representation with a dark alley or a dark, ominous place. And so is it the case that, from witnessing that, from seeing that, from, kind of having that as a mental reference point, is it the case that influences, how we actually behave and what we actually think when we're in that real life situation, when we're in a dark alley, right? If I'm walking down a dark alley and my mind is just training me to be on guard because somebody's going to come out and get me, right? I don't know here, right? But I think that's what I'm asking, right? That's what I'm curious about, is how have films, how have movies kind of influenced that which we are fearful of, that which we are, timid about. And just for the sake of vulnerability, just for the sake of disclosure, when I was in early middle school, and again, I don't know if this was a sick joke or if this was a weird, twisted lesson, but I went over to one of, and again, middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I don't remember specifically, but young and fairly impressionable as a 12, 13, or 14-year-old, went over to a really good friend's house on New Year's Eve, and this friend, their dad suggested that we watch The Exorcist. Okay? And so me and my friend and my friend's brother, who we were all friends, we still are actually, I think this experience bonded us together, went over to the house, watched, Dad suggests that we watch The Exorcist, puts it on, we watch it. It is terrifying. And again, I'm like 13. I'm like 12, 13, 14 at this point. And ultimately, the takeaway from the film, according to the father, is that good prevails over evil. He's not wrong. Okay? However, the intensity of that film has stayed with me for 20 years. Okay? And that moment, that memory that I have, and I've never rewatched the film, don't really desire to. But I remember it, right? And so this way of thinking, that this intense experience with the film, and particularly, with subjects that I think probably many of us either are curious about or frightened about, or the supernatural, and we think about spirits, we think about spirit of goodness, spirit of evil, and in particular, like when you think of like possession, yada, 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 like this gets to be some pretty scary stuff, right? And I remember that their dad just kept saying, well, good prevails over evil in the end. And it's true, so like in a way, there's a happy ending, but it's still really difficult to watch to get to that happy ending. Okay? And especially I remember as a young child, and again, when I say young, I mean I was somewhere between 12 and 14, and the way that has kind of like stayed with me for, like I said, nearly almost 2 decades. Okay? So I say all that by way of saying, like, what way have various films, or what way have various themes in films, in shows, impacted the way that we live our lives, especially as it relates to fear, right? And you can think about a whole kind of like spectrum here of various horror films, right? You have kind of like the more psychological thrillers, which I would argue are going to be more kind of in line with the films that we watch next week. Or we have more kind of those like slasher films, right, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or even Saw, and like the Saw franchise. Like there's so many Saw films. Well, why is that the case? Right? Why is it the case that that the makers of the Saw franchise feel like they need to continually make more movies? It's because people keep watching them. So does that like point to some sort of like twisted kind of like aspect of our own fundamental natures, that we're drawn to watching some really kind of messed up stuff as it relates to Saw? Right? I mean, these are kind of like challenging questions. Is it the fact that like in all of us in some capacity or another, there are these like really, really dark places that we get to weirdly explore through the fantasy of horror films, right? Because I mean, that's always and that's constantly a response, is the fact like, well, it's not real, right? Or this is just a film, so it makes it safe. Or like you go, like whenever you do see a horror film, you constantly remind yourself to say, well, this isn't real, right? This isn't real, this is fake. But yet it's still doing something to you. It's doing something to your psychological fortitude, your psychological navigation through the world that impacts you directly, right? And so I'm curious, right? The way that what we've exposed ourselves to, or that which we've been exposed to through others, right? How does that impact, and what does that do for how we live our lives in the world, right? We'll finish there, and we'll pick up with the next video.